Hello there, men, and welcome to the Masculinism Movement channel, empowering men and masculinity in the anti-male age. I'm your host, Brian Krull, and today I'm going to be mansplaining to you about the myth of the good girl. Have you ever asked yourself, where have all the good girls gone? If not all women are like that, as they say, then where are the ones who aren't? If good girls exist, where are they? Well, in this video, I'm going to put forth the proposition that the good girl archetype is actually a thing of the past. That while not all women are like that, meaning not all women ever, the ones who are good only existed in past history, not in the present. That these women were of an old school female paradigm which no longer exists. And I'm going to do this by theorizing that the last true iconically good girl has already died. The theory is such. Women derive their mindset, attitudes, and behaviors from their culture, and the cultural icons which model such behaviors for them as being the right behaviors. In days of old, there existed cultural icons who were a product of what the culture deemed to be good, and which served to model this goodness back to the culture for future generations. As our culture changed and feminism arose, and more women rebelled against what was established to have been good, the amount of cultural icons modeling goodness began to decline, more with women than men, far more. All right, as you can see in female superheroes versus the male ones. And eventually, there was only one last remaining good female icon, who then died. In order to prove this point, I will use the last remaining iconically good cultural model that I know of, and that is Brittany Murphy, who died almost 15 years ago, just before all women became completely corrupted by third and fourth wave feminism and social media and all the other aspects of our culture that corrupted them. Brittany Murphy was a cultural icon of the 90s Hollywood, whose career started on TV and then moved to film with her breakout role in Clueless, in which she played a nerdy girl who was transformed by the popular girls into one of them. Her career peaked around the year 2000 when she co-starred along Eminem in his movie 8 Mile, though the real peak of her career, in my opinion, as a film connoisseur, was in the movie Spun. In both of these movies, she played more of a bad girl type, though her good nature always shines through, and she is still a very lovable good girl, even when playing a more bad type. After that, she fell into steep decline, leading up to her death in 2009. Her last films were released posthumously and are artsy indie films that didn't pay her well, but, which she alone really makes worth seeing, and they weren't really that bad. Brittany Murphy is known for her exceptionally sweet, bubbly character, which she brings into any role. Except for when she really isn't supposed to, like when she's playing a mental patient or something, which she did 3 times, and quite well. If you've seen her both in and out of film, you will know what I'm talking about. She is so bubbly that she is overflowing with this mellifluous sweetness and good nature. And not in a fake Hollywood fashion either. If you watch her enough in and out of the movies, you get the sense that this is just how she is. She is just so inherently positive and good-natured and happy and sweet that she can hardly contain it. It is only through her great acting skills that she is able to temporarily turn off this faucet of joy and play someone who is traumatized, for instance. But being bubbly and positive, or in other words, seeming sweet and good-natured, is not what makes a person actually good. These things do not equate with goodness, for I've also studied organized crime very extensively throughout my life, and you will find that most gangsters, while they may make money through nefarious means, tend to also be very positive and bubbly when in social situations, and are some of the most fun people to, go out drinking and eating and celebrate with. And speaking of gangsters, it just so happens that Brittany Murphy's father was actually a mobbed-up musician who did time in jail for his organized criminal activity, and that her real last name is Bertolotti, which she changed when she moved to Hollywood so that she wouldn't be associated with, the Italian mafia and the whole stigma that goes along with all of that, right? So if a positive attitude is not what makes a person good, then why am I calling Brittany Murphy the last iconically good girl? For I know that many of you men out there may have already written her off as probably just another Hollywood starlet who is just like the rest of Hollywood. They all wear masks to make themselves appear however they want to be seen, But in reality, they are all really quite rotten and corrupt. But while Brittany Murphy may have lived and worked in Hollywood, and in fact it was in the house that was last owned by Britney Spears and Madonna before that, she had opted out of the whole Hollywood social scene, which is in fact what cost her her career. You see, Brittany Murphy was too much a good girl to want to go out to the Hollywood parties. She wished to stay away from drugs, for starters, and she was also an introvert and a homebody and a family girl. She loved her mother and spending time with her more than anything in the world. So while she was a great artist and performer, she was always an outsider in Hollywood and treated like one. And eventually it became hard for her to find work in Hollywood, and she could only find it outside of the mainstream Hollywood movie scene and indie and B-movie and made-for-TV movie scene. So you see, from the 90s to the 2000s, show business was changing and becoming so corrupt that a good girl like her could no longer be a Hollywood icon. So while she could still be in the 90s, after the 2000s, that was a thing of the past. By 2010, a girl like her could not even exist in this world anymore. It simply had no place for her. But again, what makes her such an iconically good girl, as I say? Let me go over the criteria that I am using to substantiate my claim of what a good girl is, and that she, in fact, is one. And I'll be using criteria here that makes a girl not just good for the community and anyone who may know her or be influenced by her, but what makes a girl good enough to also be wife material. Because that's what most men want a good girl in their lives for, right? So the first one is that she was exceptionally fit and attractive, as you can see in the photos. She was actually almost too fit in that she was extremely skinny, by modern standards at least. You know, back in the day, it was more common for girls to be on the skinnier side, and now it's more common for them to be on the fatter side. So it makes her look, even skinnier. And she's also almost too attractive, like, at least for me. Like, it hurts my eyes to look at her for too long. Maybe it's just because I'll end up staring at the screen for too long and then realize that I've somehow gotten way too close to it. And she is one of the few women out there that didn't need to use her sexuality too liberally or radically. In fact, there are no nude scenes or photos of her out there. Believe me, I've looked. She certainly has some really sexy photos and scenes, and they are indeed very sexy. But they aren't really that risque, at least, again, not by today's standards. And she also didn't need to get too made up to look good. She can be seen in some pictures without a lot of makeup, and she looks really good, right? You'll find her in many pictures with a lot of makeup on, as that's the thing, when you're in Hollywood, when you're on screen. But you can also find her looking quite attractive without it. And there's even like movies where they try to make her look unattractive, like a junkie, and she still looks like, realistically quite attractive. So in spite of being a hot Hollywood starlet, she was really just an artistic girl next door type and had all of the innocence to go along with that, in spite of the fact that she was also physically insanely hot. And that's just the first thing about her on the surface level. Number two is that in spite of being so fit and attractive, she was not superficial when it came to the looks of men she dated, and was not physically hypergamous either. She did try dating men who were as attractive as her, like Ashton Kutcher, who was seen as like one of the most attractive guys in the world at one point, I think. But eventually, she settled with a man who was actually overweight and below average in attractiveness, because obviously looks didn't matter that much to her. So when it came to attractiveness, she was actually hypogamous. And number three is that in spite of being a millionaire, she was not hypergamous when it came to finances either. She didn't only date other celebrities who were even richer and more famous than her. In fact, quite the opposite. For the man she married was a poor man of much lower status compared to her. He had actually more debt than assets, and that didn't seem to matter to her either. So she was actually one of the only women out there who was financially hypogamous. And number four, when it came to money, Brittany Murphy was a benevolent benefactor. She financially supported a number of people in her life. She was a giver and not a taker like most women are, even when it came to her husband, who was one of the people she financially supported, as was her disabled mother. And when it comes to people who have money and are quite well wealthy as she was a millionaire, especially people who are in corrupt industries like Hollywood and the movie business. One of the great markers of being a good person is if they are charitable or not. Do they hoard their wealth, or are they a benevolent and charitable person? And Brittany Murphy was a benefactor who financially took care of many people who needed that kind of support in her life, and that is extremely rare for a woman to do. So, you really have to give her credit for that. And that's not all. Number 5, she was a loyal woman. She was loyal to her husband to a fault. In fact, not only did she never cheat on him in spite of him being unattractive and her being one of the hottest girls in the world, but she supported her husband no matter what. Even when he was accused of murder, she hired a lawyer to get him off, which is something I see as a demonstration of the greatest level of loyalty possible. You really can't ask for more in a woman than that, can you? Well, in this case you can, because on top of that, number 6, she was a submissive and obedient girl to her man. Again, to a fault. She wasn't domineering and controlling of him like most women are to their husbands, especially in this day and age. Rather, she gave him dominance and control over her, and she was a very submissive and obedient wife, always doing as he asked her, even when it ended up being detrimental to her health, resulting in her death. Sounds like an ideal wife, right? Now, obviously, there are some underlying dark truths here that we do need to point out. Here we have a girl who was so good, innocent, and pure that all it took was being involved with a toxic culture and toxic partners to bring about her downfall and death. She was too good, pure, and innocent to be able to prevent it. And being innocent in these ways in such a time and place left her vulnerable to infection. And so in 2009, she died of illnesses that were preventable, but which hadn't been treated because her husband had been telling her not to go to the doctor because he thought it would just pass like a cold. And every time she went to the doctor, the paparazzi would take photos of her doing so, and the tabloids would start making accusations of her going, to get drug treatment or plastic surgery, or, that something is wrong with her or something like that. She was in this culture that was so toxic, unhealthy, and downright sick that it made her sick too, and in a very real sense stopped her from getting medical treatment and being able to heal. And this is exactly what a completely corrupt culture will do to the remaining good individuals out there. I know this firsthand. For you see, barring the fame and stardom, I've followed a very similar path in my life to her. I too was raised with the same good old-fashioned values as her in the same Christian culture. And we were raised and taught to rely upon these Christian community values and trust, and focus on spreading goodwill to men and doing unto others as you would expect them to do to you, and told that as long as you do that, they generally will do the same to you. Only to find that out in the real world, this is often seen as vulnerability to be exploited, because most other people do not have those same values, and men like me who are too naive and leave themselves vulnerable are open to being harmed, as I was in many ways, oftentimes physically, which left me with a number of health problems, including PTSD, and caused me to become a homebody and not want to associate with many people, just like Brittany Murphy did. Which, basically in turn caused both of us to have a professional downfall. Back when I was a social butterfly, I was able to be successful because I could deal with people. I did 2 world tours. I never was, rich or famous like her. But becoming antisocial and sticking to yourself generally isn't good for business, right? Most industries rely on a certain level of social trust and developing relationships. But anyways, I use this story not because I knew Brittany Murphy personally, but because I know her story personally. And I feel that I know her story well enough to be able to make these claims about her. And I believe that she was, in fact, the last iconically good girl, and that in the near 15 years since her passing, there have been no more good girls left in the world. At least not ones that meet the criteria for what makes a good girl that I have laid out, which is, of course, my own theory, and you could certainly argue against it if you like, especially if you did know her personally, since I didn't. But I've never heard of anyone speaking out against her because of, her treating anyone poorly. And there is a very good chance that if she had not died and had continued to live into this age of cell phones and social media that she too would have been corrupted, as that is what happened with the one good girl that I ever dated, who was once one of the few elite old school women left. But she also was a filmmaker, so she was already in the film industry, and then she moved to Hollywood to try to, be more successful as a filmmaker. And then social media and cell phones took over, and she just basically became another NPC in the Matrix. And such a transformation is a terrible thing to witness. So I'm quite glad that I didn't have to do so with Brittany, as it, wouldn't have been much less painful than her death for me to have to see. But there is also a high probability that just as how she rejected the entire Hollywood social scene in order to be a homebody, that she would have done the same with social media. And again, this is why she didn't end up having a long career in Hollywood, or a long life in this world for that matter. A corrupt community demands conformity, or you will be exiled. And often exile means death, as most people cannot survive without a supportive community around them, especially women, especially the more innocent younger girls, which is why people were taught to be good by culture in the first place, to take care of its citizens that needed it. However, now they are being taught to be bad and antisocial. And as I said, women are more susceptible to social conditioning and cultural programming. And that is why there are no good girls left. At least, not ones that meet the criteria I laid out and are as iconically good as her. Perhaps there exists some who are good in all of the ways I outlined, except for one, maybe two. Perhaps there exists some who are just not fit and attractive enough to be wife material, but they're still good girls otherwise. You just wouldn't want to, be with them romantically. Or perhaps they are good, but they are not 100% good. They have another side of them, and they're really only good when it suits them. It's like a situational, temporary goodness. So perhaps there are exceptions, but they're only going to be exceptions that prove the rule. And that rule is that there really are no good girls out there anymore. The good girl archetype is now just a myth. It is a thing of the past, a part of an ancient cultural mythology that no longer exists in our current day and age. And the more time goes on, the more we will look back upon it as a mythical and even mystical thing. Something that seems more surreal than real. Something that we will even begin to question if it ever actually really existed at all. And in fact, I may be wrong. I may be wrong about the whole concept of the good girl. There may be crucial criteria which I'm forgetting. As is often the case for me, I'm just a man. I can't think of everything, can I? For instance, one thing I didn't include was cooking and cleaning, which is something most men consider to be good wife material. Though I would say that doing these things doesn't make a girl or a person good, so much as useful as a wife or even a roommate. So I left it out. You can be a bad person and still cook and clean, right? And some other men might debate me on it, but I'm sure you understand my reasoning. And anyway, I can only assume that after getting rich, Brittany did not cook or clean, but beforehand, she probably did. There's no way for me to know because I didn't know her. And because I didn't know her personally, I could actually be wrong about much that I think about her. So Brittany Murphy may have actually not been a good girl. I may be mistaken in that. As I may be about the one good girl I ever dated, as I didn't really know her for all that long. I didn't know her my entire life, but only a small fraction of it. So how well can you actually know someone who you date? Can you really prove that someone is definitively good? No. There's no scientific method or standardized measure for goodness. It's like trying to evaluate a work of art. It's just like how I have evaluated her acting to be good. But someone who knows more about acting, has been to acting school and teaches it, might evaluate some of her acting to be bad that I have found to be good. And it's important to know when you might be wrong, because what you believe in is really just an unscientific theory, or maybe not even technically a theory at all, but a notion at best, which is, what this actually is. And so my theory or notion that good girls are a thing of the past may actually be false. They may have never been a thing at all. The problem may not be the times that we live in now, but with female nature as a whole, which may very well be essentially bad. For there is evidence for this being the case if we, go back thousands of years to the biblical times in which the Old Testament was written, and we read Ecclesiastes 7:28. It says that he found that only one man in 1,000 is good. And this is certainly a good enough survey sample to take, speaking from a social science perspective, but that not even 1 out of 1,000 women were good, which means less than 0.1%, which might as well be zero. And this statistic lines up perfectly with my own findings in playing the numbers game as a PUA. For that woman that I mentioned was the only one good girl I've ever been with, was only one in more than 2,000 I've met and attempted to form a meaningful connection with. And even then, I wasn't sure enough about her even to commit to her. So it very well may be the case that there have never been any good women ever. However, if they ever have existed, we can be certain that they are a thing of the past and cannot exist in modern culture, and that whenever they do exist, their numbers are so low as to be next to zero and negligible, as you could invest your entire life looking for one and never find it for sure. And just in case you don't believe that there are no good girls anymore, even if there are, again, the concept of what constitutes a good girl is relative, not absolute. And so it doesn't have a real definitive meaning. You could debate it because, what does it mean to be a good girl? There's no real standard. So people could disagree with what I said is good about Brittany Murphy. But what's more is that even if you don't, just because I've called her a good girl, and even if she was, that doesn't mean she was ideal or perfect. For instance, I'm certain that she was a narcissist, and that while she was a benevolent, good-natured person, I'm sure her relationships were codependent, and thus, in some ways, unhealthy, and in this case, very detrimental ways that led to her death. So therein lies the problem, that no matter what standards we say should make a person good, there's still room for error. Female nature has inherent faults and flaws. Even the best women are imperfect, and we aren't even talking about the best, we're talking about good. I'm just using one of the best women as an example to talk about goodness. But even good types of girls can still at times have a tendency to do bad things. So even if you do find one, that doesn't mean she can't still hurt you, or that it won't end badly. And I think that this is one of the main reasons why guys want to look for a good girl type, because they've tried bad girls and sluts and such, and found that they are not relationship material, and when you try to make a wife out of a hoe, it just gets you hurt. So they look to the good girls because they think the good girls are not going to hurt them, but they are wrong. Okay, you can still get your heart broken by a good girl. And I mean, Brittany Murphy and her husband both ended up dead from the same causes, so if that doesn't exemplify how you can still get hurt in a relationship with a good girl, I don't know what does. And so even my very example of what I am using to define what a good girl is and put forth this whole theory still wasn't good enough to produce a healthy, sustainable relationship. And I talked before in my video on traditional conservative religious women, linked below, that when they consider themselves to be good and moral and virtuous and righteous and such, that doesn't mean that they are good, because their sense of morality tends to make them feel narcissistic and morally superior to others, which is why there are so many stories of religious people committing child abuse and other atrocities. And yes, even women. I have studied many cases of women doing these things. And what you'll find is that many girls who seem like good girls don't end up actually being good once you really get to know them. And that is no good. So the essential truth of the matter is there are no good women out there. The good girl is nothing more than a modern day myth. If there ever was one, the last iconically good one was taken from us by this corrupt culture we live in well over a decade ago. And without good cultural icons in place to model what goodness is, modern women are now definitively bad in their nature. And so the best thing you can do for yourself is to go your own way and avoid them. So stop looking for a good girl who, is going to be good to you. Just focus on being good to yourself. And that is the only way you can really ensure good treatment of yourself. And if you are a film lover and aren't familiar with Brittany Murphy's work, I highly recommend the movie Spun, which is about a bunch of junkies and drug dealers who use crystal meth, and one, big drug cook, and a really amazing film. Really love the editing of it, and has some amazing, phenomenal acting from Brittany Murphy that gives you a real tearjerker at the climax when she's sort of going off on this, drug-dazed rant about her relationship with her son that got taken away from her and that she's going to get back with. Really powerful stuff. And then there's Sin City, which is neo-noir, a black and white film with splashes of color and, a lot of good old-fashioned neo-noir style drama done by Robert Rodriguez. He loves to over-dramatize things. And, it's based on a graphic novel. It's going to be very comical in many ways, and seeing Brittany Murphy, really flex her acting skills and sort of dramatize the things she's saying. It's really fun. Then there's this one called Don't Say a Word. It's a dark thriller where she plays this traumatized mental patient. And there's a mystery aspect. That was actually the first Brittany Murphy movie that I really loved and was really blown away by. And then if you like movies like that are dark or film noir types or murder mystery types, there's also one called The Dead Girl. And I recommend those in that order. And those are for if you are looking for like a big blockbuster, of which she did many. Though these are all darker films of hers and will have some disturbing parts in them, just so you know. So I personally like that shit because I'm a dark, twisted motherfucker, but I know, a lot of people don't. But the majority of her films aren't actually so dark as those. So if you're looking for a comedy, she did lots of those. They're mostly romantic comedies, though, so I wouldn't recommend them here on a MGTOW channel, but feel free to look up her IMDb, of course. The two great comedies that she did that aren't romantic are one I recommend that's called Drop Dead Gorgeous. And though she plays a small role, the lead is Kirsten Dunst, but it's a hilarious movie with lots of sexy teens from the 90s in it, and made me laugh out loud. And then she played an even smaller role in this movie called Bong Water, next to Jack Black and Luke Wilson, and that's also a great comedy. And if you like artsy indie films, then I recommend her film noir style films Across the Hall and Something Wicked, which were her last films released posthumously. Though these films are also darker ones, especially the second. And if you're a horror fan, especially if you like classic 90s slasher films, she did a fun horror movie called Cherry Falls about a killer targeting virgins. So all these teens start trying to lose their virginity. Oh man, that was a fun one. If you're not into that kind of stuff, she also did a time travel movie with lead Kirsten Dunst about a girl who ends up back in the past at a concentration camp. And it's worth checking out. It's called The Devil's Arithmetic. And I recommend looking up her IMDb and looking through her whole body of work because these are just my own personal picks based on my own taste. And there's films of hers that are still on my list that I want to see but haven't yet because I'm waiting, since she's not making new ones. And one of those is also 8 Mile. I've never seen that because I'm not into Eminem or rap music. But if you are, as most people these days are, you should definitely watch that one. So look her up. She was such a great actress, my personal favorite, and she did so much great work in her short time here. And it's just so nice to see such a good girl on screen, since we don't really get to see them, in reality. And watching her is about as close as any man today is ever going to get to meeting one of the mythical good girls of old. That concludes this video. Thanks for listening. I hope I mansplained that well enough for you. If I did, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and check out the links below for more resources for your masculine personal development. And if you can afford to donate, please do so with the PayPal link below because your support funds me doing this work and fighting the good fight for men like you. And you can stay tuned for the next video coming out soon. And take care of yourselves, men, because no woman out there is going to.